When his lips touched mine, the whole world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was sudden, unexpected, like lightning hitting your porch during a summer storm. I hadn't planned for this, hadn't even allowed myself to imagine it, yet there I stood, heart hammering wildly in my chest, feeling like a teenager caught behind the bleachers after prom. He pulled back slowly, eyes questioning, breath warm against my face. I stared back, frozen in a silent panic, my mind racing through every reason this was wrong. All evening, I'd felt the tension building between us like static electricity. His gaze lingering a bit too long across the dinner table, the accidental brush of his arm against mine in the hallway. I told myself it was nothing, just loneliness playing tricks. After all, I'd been married to Victor for 22 years. 22 comfortable, predictable years. And this man in front of me, Paul, was young enough to make me blush if anyone found out. But right now logic didn't matter, because the spark he just ignited felt stronger than any reason I'd ever known. I stirred my coffee twice as long that morning, pretending it was just another day, but everything tasted different, even silence. I smiled at Victor as he passed behind me, humming an old tune, completely unaware that his wife had crossed a line the night before she never thought she'd approach. I sat at the kitchen table and nodded at the right moments while he read the paper aloud like he always did, but his voice barely registered through the static in my head. Across the room, Paul walked in, hair damp from a shower, his expression unreadable, his eyes avoiding mine with a discipline that felt cruel. He greeted us both politely, casual as a neighbor dropping by, and I hated how much that calm undid me. Victor sipped his coffee and mentioned weekend chores, never once glancing in my direction long enough to notice the tremor in my hand or the way my breath caught every time Paul moved. Victor held up a silver lighter, his brow furrowed just enough to freeze the air between us, and said he found it under the back seat while cleaning out the car. I laughed too quickly, my voice pitched higher than usual, tossing out some vague comment about it probably being left by one of the neighbors during that last barbecue, but his eyes lingered on me a second too long. He didn't say anything else, just placed it on the counter, yet the way he did it made my stomach twist like a knot being pulled tight. I watched him leave the room and fought the urge to follow, to explain something I hadn't even fully admitted to myself. Paul walked past me minutes later without looking up, his silence louder than a slammed door. I stood there, pulse racing, caught between two men who suddenly seemed to exist in different universes. One too close, the other slipping away. The SUV rolled past pine trees and fading road signs as Victor hummed along with the radio, while I stared out the window pretending not to count the miles between me and my last moment of clarity. The lake house always meant peace, but this time it felt like a trap wrapped in nostalgia and pine-scented air, and I knew the walls would be too thin for the thoughts I couldn't quiet. Victor reached over to squeeze my hand, warm and familiar, and whispered something about us needing time alone, and I smiled like a woman who still believed in that kind of fix. Paul followed us silently inside, carrying bags, his expression neutral, his presence like static clinging to everything I touched. We barely spoke, but each accidental glance was a spark I couldn't ignore. Later, while Victor built a fire and asked if I remembered our first summer here, I caught Paul's eyes across the room, and forgot how to breathe. I didn't mean to listen, but the hallway carried every word like a secret begging to be heard, and when I heard Paul's voice low and strained, I froze behind the half-closed door with my breath caught in my throat. He spoke quietly, telling someone he hadn't slept in weeks since the funeral, said the trip wasn't just about getting away, but trying not to fall apart, and I felt my stomach drop as he mentioned a breakup that took the last good thing I had. I leaned against the wall, shaken, realizing the pull between us wasn't just attraction, it was grief, raw and displaced, reaching for something that looked like comfort. I should have stepped back, walked away, said nothing. But instead I stood there, heart racing as compassion tangled with desire, and something deeper cracked open inside me. That night, lying awake in the dark, I didn't think about escape. I thought about saying yes that I found Paul by the shed, pretending to fix a latch that didn't need fixing, and my voice trembled when I said his name, already knowing this conversation wouldn't go how I rehearsed it. I told him I knew about the funeral, about the breakup, about the reason he came here, and when his eyes met mine, there was no defense. Only exhaustion and something softer I wasn't ready for. He didn't thank me or brush it off, he just stood there, open and too close, and I realized this wasn't a passing thing for either of us. Later, inside, Victor watched me too long as I folded laundry that didn't need folding, and his questions about dinner felt sharper than usual, his gaze lingering with quiet suspicion. That night, I lay in bed with my thoughts wrapped in guilt, not just for myself but for the storm I felt building behind Paul's eyes, and the part of me that wanted to stand in it. The air was thick with humidity as we walked the edge of the property, our steps crunching softly over gravel while the sun sank behind the trees in a blur of gold and gray, and I knew something was coming before he even spoke. Paul stopped near the old bench by the fence line, hands buried deep in his pockets, eyes locked on the horizon, and said he was leaving tomorrow. Too much tension, too many lines already crossed. My chest tightened before I could hide it, and the words tumbled out, asking why it had to be so final, why now, why him, and I hated how much I meant every question. He looked at me with that same quiet sorrow he wore like armor and said, "Because I care enough not to wreck what's left." We stood there in silence, side by side, closer in that stillness than we'd ever been in touch, and I let him go without reaching. The suitcase was gone by morning, the hallway too quiet, the scent of his cologne still faint near the door, and I thought I could breathe until Victor walked in holding the lighter between his fingers like a loaded question. He didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse, he just asked, calm and steady, if something had happened between me and Paul, his eyes scanning my face like he already knew. I tried to lie or maybe soften the truth, muttering that things got confusing, emotions blurred, but nothing physical, nothing he couldn't forgive if he wanted to. His silence hit harder than shouting, and when he finally stepped back, his face pale and drawn, he whispered, "You broke something I can't fix." I reached for him, but he flinched, grabbed his keys and walked out without another word. The door closed and I stood alone in the middle of the kitchen, realizing I hadn't just lost Paul. I might have lost everything. The house felt colder without their footsteps, every creak of the floorboard echoing louder as I moved through rooms that suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was trespassing in my own life. I cleaned the kitchen twice, folded already folded towels, opened and closed drawers just to hear something other than the silence pressing against my chest. When Victor's message came, short, distant, saying he needed space to think and that forgiveness wasn't something he could promise, I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. The words weren't cruel, but they carried a finality that stung deeper than anger ever could. I wasn't the same woman I'd been 2 weeks ago, and no amount of pretending could rewind what had been set in motion. I realized I hadn't just cracked our marriage, I'd shattered something inside myself, and now I wasn't sure if I feared losing Victor, or feared finding out I didn't. His name lit up my screen just after sunset, and before I could decide whether to answer, my thumb was already pressing accept, my breath caught somewhere between hope and dread. Paul's voice was quiet, steady, different, like someone who had finally come up for air after drowning too long, and he told me gently that he couldn't come back, that he needed to rebuild his life without shadows or borrowed emotions. I didn't beg, didn't cry, just listened, knowing deep down he was right, even if a part of me still ached to argue. After the call ended, I sat in the dark, no tears, just a strange calm spreading through me like something broken finally settling into place. For the first time, I stopped asking what everyone else needed and started asking what I truly wanted. I didn't have the answer yet, but I was ready to face Victor, not as a wife trying to repair, but as a woman finally awake.